But let's take a quick look at the latest in terms of your COVID-19 numbers. Although the number of COVID-19 cases in the country is falling, over 85,000 people have died so far.
There are currently around 104,000 active cases. Over 7 million people are fully vaccinated against COVID-19. Another 7 million are partially vaccinated.
Now, a new global study on COVID-19 vaccines for children is underway. South African children are participating in a trial for Chinese manufacturer Sinovac to test the safety and efficacy of the vaccine. Professor Barry Schoub is the chairperson of the Ministerial Advisory Committee on COVID-19 vaccines and joins us live tonight. Professor Schoub, good evening. Thank you for your time. We've seen SAPRA, of course, approving the use of Sinovac vaccines locally, but government has not procured any vaccines yet. So just explain to us the thinking around starting a trial amongst children with Sinovac when it actually hasn't been used in the country.
Yes, good evening, Kathy. I think we need to separate the vaccine rollout, in other words, rolled out to the population, versus a scientific trial. I think what's happening at the Sefako Makgato Health Sciences faculty is looking as a scientific study. In other words, a study how this vaccine behaves in children. And that, of course, has got great value. We need to, as much as information as we can gather of how these vaccines behave, in fact, particularly in our country. So I think it is important that we are part of this multinational trial. It's actually 5 countries that are involved. It's a total of 14,000 subjects are being looked at. So I think it's important to get that information, but that we need to separate from the vaccine rollout. The vaccine rollout at the moment is with 2 vaccines, the Pfizer vaccine and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. We have looked at the Sinovac vaccine, and we've looked at the AstraZeneca vaccine as potential standby vaccines if there were to be any interruptions in the supply of either Pfizer or Johnson & Johnson, but so far we haven't had any notice of any interruptions to our supply. And as the State President mentioned the other night, our supplies seem to be pretty secure at the moment.
Of course, the reason I'm bringing this up, Professor Schoub, is that there are big questions about why that is not the case, why Sinovac is not available as an option for South Africans, especially those who are quite skeptical of a product that they perceive as coming from the West and would much rather be vaccinated through one of our regional partners' vaccines.
Well, you know, as a scientific body, which the Ministerial Advisory Committee on Vaccines is, we evaluated vaccines on the scientific grounds, independent of where the vaccines come from. We looked at the quality of the vaccines, we looked at its applicability, we looked at all the characteristics, and we found that those 2 vaccines, the Pfizer vaccine and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, are really vaccines which totally fit into our requirements. They are, in fact, the 2 premium vaccines as far as we're concerned. We're not dismissing other vaccines. As I said, we are looking at those particular 2 vaccines as standby vaccines. But at the moment, we've got 2 very good vaccines which we know from scientific data, from rigorous scientific data, are both safe and effective. And that was really the kind of motivation or the criteria that we used to recommend the use of those 2 vaccines.
Sure. And, you know, when one looks at, let's say, the use of Johnson & Johnson in the country, there was first the trial that took place, and that preceded the procurement of J&J vaccines for the full rollout in the country. And many will then wonder, and just listening to what you're saying, Professor Schoub, in terms of what you as the Ministerial Advisory Committee have considered to be the premium brand, do you have concerns about those children who will be participating in this trial?
No, I presume it has as you mentioned earlier, Kathy, the vaccine has got SAPRA approval, and SAPRA is a body which does a very rigorous examination of the vaccine and all its components for safety and for efficacy. So I think they've okayed the vaccine, and presumably it's also gone through an ethics approval of the university, presumably. So I think on both of those counts, I think we can be reassured that all the safety requirements have been ticked, and now we're just looking at how effective it is, how it behaves, etc.
Of course,
What's the immune response?
Sure. It also raises the question about vaccinating under 18s. Is that a conversation you're having in the Ministerial Advisory Committee?
It is being looked at, but, you know, really our priority at the moment, we must not lose sight of what the main priority is, and that is to reduce severe infection hospitalization, and that's really in the adult population. And the adult population, we've still got a long way to go in terms of vaccine coverage, and particularly we're looking at the older, the more senior citizens, but also all adults. We need to focus on getting as many adults immunized as soon as possible, and then we can look at the children. The children form a very minor component of severe disease, of hospitalization and so on. And that's really must be our main focus at the moment.
Given the kind of politics that we have seen around vaccines and, you know, what getting a particular vaccine ideologically would mean or would represent, any work that is being done by the Ministerial Advisory Committee to see whether there would in fact be a causal link between the availability of, let's say, the vaccines from China or from Russia, the availability on the market, and the impact that that would have on increasing the number of vaccinations?
I don't think that there's a constraint in the supply of those two vaccines, the Pfizer and the Johnson & Johnson. I don't think that's the bottleneck. The bottleneck is really getting it into the arms, getting it into people. So we don't need at this stage to look at other vaccines, whether it's the Chinese vaccine, Russian vaccine, or any other vaccine, the AstraZeneca. We don't need to look at any of those vaccines. We do have enough vaccines, as the state president mentioned the other night, till the end of the year. So that's not the problem. The problem is getting it to people, because there is a hesitancy problem. There's a hesitancy and an apathy problem. We need to get more people to vaccination sites. There's no shortage of the vaccines. It's getting people to be vaccinated. That's the problem.
Professor Barry Schoub, let's leave it there for tonight. He's the chair of the Ministerial Advisory Committee on COVID-19 vaccines.